What is going on here? Are our children becoming more violent, or have we just become more aware of it?
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. I think that what we've noticed is that violence is increasing. Over the last 3 years that we've been looking more closely at the statistics around violence in schools, it has been getting worse. And this is in an overall context of increased violence across South Africa, unfortunately.
Why are children in South Africa in particular so angry and so violent?
I think that what we've found, particularly with the school climate survey for learners, which we've developed, is that the levels of violence among children mirror the levels of violence they experience in the classroom and at home and in society. And they, as young people, are struggling to find alternate ways of dealing with problems that don't involve resorting to violence.
How do the likes of the education department and also, more importantly, parents intervene then to make sure that we bring down these levels of violence in our classrooms and playgrounds?
That's a very interesting question. We've been grappling with this since about 2012 as an institute, working with 65 schools directly and 330 more obliquely. The key is actually to not see it as a challenge that has to be met head on, but rather to work with the underlying drivers that cause the violence in schools particularly. One of the ways we've found that really works is to work very closely with teachers and to build their own capacity to build peace in classrooms, manage conflict, and practice restorative justice. And we've also worked with learners in a selection of high schools where we are training them so that they're able to deal with conflict more effectively, and to do so in such a way that doesn't involve them having to resort to escalation procedures that eventually result in learners being excluded or expelled. The whole point is to focus on the holistic development of each person within the school, not just the learners, but also the teachers. And then in some schools also we've been working with the parents and getting them involved using the same principles that we have throughout our program.
Let's talk about another worrying issue, a major headache, in fact, on our playgrounds and across schools, if you will, and that's the issue of racism. We've seen a lot of incidents over the past few months. Do we have data that we can rely on to give us a close enough to accurate idea of just how bad the situation is?
What we have is, of the 25 items which are included in the school climate survey, one of them relates specifically to disrespect of culture and religion and language. And so we do have a statistic for each of the schools. And in schools where there is a higher degree of mixture of different race groups all in one school, and particularly where one race group or one linguistic group is in power or has rank, that does complicate the issue. It means that the normal interactions that one would expect between teachers and learners gets mediated through the existing discourses. So if there's a racial overtone to things, or there's some kind of cultural interpretation or some kind of linguistic assumption, that then changes the way that learners experience school. So we've got a figure recently, the 32% of the learners we surveyed, and these are 5,436 learners in 63 schools, they say that they've been disrespected at some point over the last year. So that figures in that. And then we also look at the figures for how teachers treat learners. So whether the teachers use ridicule or they call learners names. And in further research, there have been some instances where the names that teachers are calling learners have had a racial overtone, and in others where it's more of a sort of linguistic generalization or some other kind of discrimination.
Let's talk about the official handling then of incidents of racism or suspected racism. Just yesterday we had a court overturn the suspension of a teacher at the Hoerskool President in the Northwest. This is the woman, just brief background for those who may have missed it. She was suspended for taking and sharing an image of a class that appeared segregated, black and white pupils made to sit in different groups. The court saying the MEC did not act according to the law in that situation. So with that context, is it your reading then that those in charge of the education system know what to do in dealing with racism, and how then in dealing with it, are they sensitive enough to the feelings of those who feel discriminated against, but also do well enough to act within the confines of the law?
I think that's a very interesting question. The key thing for us is that as part of the Building Peaceful Schools program, one of the themes or one of the foci that we've had has been on affirming identity and challenging racism. And that consisted of 3 workshops which aim to build the capacity of teachers to cope with instances of racism and to examine their own prejudices and their own approaches to the situation. In terms of policy and the response from schools, I can't speak for schools outside our network, but I think that the schools that have been part of the Building Peaceful Schools program have, in fact, been capacitated to the point where they would handle situations like this restoratively, but they would also handle it within the letter of the law. So if there's hate speech involved, or if there is visible discrimination, or there's some other thing which is in contravention of the Constitution, then that would be dealt with as per the law.
All right, Colin McKenzie, thank you so much for your time this afternoon.